Welcome to this segment of Inside the Teen Mind. Today we're focusing on late adolescence, the Launchpad stage, typically ages 18 to 24. This segment will help you understand the emotional and social transformation that young adults experience as they move into independence, form more stable identities, and expand their worldview. I'm Dr. Lisa Connick, clinical psychologist and founder of Connick & Associates.
And I'm Amanda McMillan, licensed clinical social worker and executive director of the Alive Center. All right, Lisa, let's dive into this. Okay, so now we're moving into late adolescence, that 18 to 24, 26-year-old. And this is a stage we call the Launchpad. And honestly, for me growing up, I always thought that this stage was adulthood, right? My mom was married at 19, and here this is a huge stage of adolescence still. Like, this is what the science is saying, and what we've learned over the years is how our brain is still developing. And we're still growing emotionally and physically and socially in this area. And especially this generation seems to be a little bit more dependent on the family structure and on parents, right? So this is really about that 18 to 26, and where they're not only imagining, they're actually starting to practice what adulthood is. They're kind of testing it out. They're starting to live on their own. They're starting to pay bills, ideally. That's when I defined myself as an adult, when I got my first real bills. I had to pay my own rent, right? They're balancing work or college, honestly. And developing their own beliefs and value systems. Sometimes they may look very different than their parents. They may realize that they have different political ideology or a religious ideology than their parents, because now they're exploring something new. And that's where parents might identify them as like a rebellion stage, or being not really understanding where they're coming from. It can kind of cause some conflict there. But it's also can be like, an exciting time, right? It's
Absolutely.
one that's filled with a lot of uncertainty for this stage. I would love for you to give me your perspective. You actually have a son in this stage, and also in your practice.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. I've got a 19 and an almost 21-year-old.
Oh, my goodness.
And we do see a lot of adolescents at the practice who are navigating that, we call it transitional phase, right, into adulthood. So they're maybe graduating or preparing to graduate from high school at 18, and planning their next steps, whether that be college, vocational, military, or uncertainty of what the next steps might be. So this is why we think of this stage as very exciting and uncertain. Kids, this stage of adolescence, I think a lot of youth are excited to turn 18 because they have some new opportunities at 18. They're officially an adult. And then when they're 21, they're like, yeah, now I'm really an adult. I can do everything except rent a car. So they can vote. They can get buy a drink in a bar. They, there's those additional things that they can do at this stage. So that's exciting, it's uncertain. So I think this comes with, we call these young adults, but they feel a mix of pride and pressure. They're trying to identify their path forward. They have a lot of questions about college, about careers, relationships, and identity can take a center stage, and they are likely to be experiencing some anxiety about the future, which is really common in this stage of development. A lot of social comparisons and anxiety. So an example would be if their friends are going to college and they're not sure if that's the track for them. That leads to a lot of stress and concern about the future. There's also a lot of challenges with social media when it relates to identifying your track and your goals and what you want to do. So it's a lot to carry while still growing into a full adult person, right? So I think as we take a next step forward here, let's look at the brain development, what's happening in this stage of adolescence, or as we say, young adulthood. Underneath these life changes, the brain is finally approaching maturity, but it's not quite there yet. So when we look at this brain developmental piece at this stage, the prefrontal cortex, which again is that region that's responsible for planning, judgment, and impulse control, is continuing to develop and strengthen, which allows for better foresight, which is really beneficial during this stage of planning for the future. And there is more, you may see more consistent follow through. You might see improved self-regulation compared to those earlier teen years, with emotional control, a little more maturity in your adolescent.
Yeah, because now they're choosing what they want to do.
Yes.
Right? If they're choosing to work, because now they also have more natural consequences, right? If they are going to college, they're choosing their major, something ideally they're really interested in and they care about. So they're going to invest and study in that, and they understand that they want to pass ideally and get good grades. Or if they're working, they're ideally choosing a job that they care about and or supporting a lifestyle that they care about, type of thing. So there's a little bit more direct connectedness to the natural consequences there.
Absolutely. And I think that those life decisions that we're seeing with that increased autonomy are also aligning with the maturation that is going on in the brain at the same time. Another key change for brain development is connectivity between the brain's emotional centers and logical decision-making areas. So we're seeing more connection between emotion, which is that amygdala, and the executive functioning system is more mature at this stage. So we're seeing that stronger connection, meaning that emotions and reasoning skills are working together more effectively. Before, if you remember, there was a lot of impulsivity that was driving it, a lot of emotions, but now we're able to have more balanced, thoughtful decision making, which is really critical for young adulthood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
That being said, late adolescents are still prone to risk-taking more than full adults. So we may see this in both social or emotionally charged situations. Mm. The difference here is now that they can pause to consider the outcomes before acting, which is a skill that wasn't fully accessible earlier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. So let's talk a little bit more about like the emotional development. During this time, we're seeing major emotional and social growth as young adults start to carve out their own identity, make decisions about their future, and form deeper relationships. This is where they might be starting to think about marriage or even having kids, or definitely going into a career. Those are all really major decisions that are kind of developing their identity of who am I? Who am I separate from my family, and how I want to grow as an adult.
We often will see young adults at this stage having long-term intimate partnerships, right? They have been dating somebody for maybe even a few years at this stage, or they've met someone if they're in college and it's becoming a little more serious.
Right, yeah. Or they've like really spent years experimenting with different types of roles and values and beliefs and kind of understanding how they fit into this world, right? And they're starting to solidify what makes them them.
Mm-hmm. The emotion regulation system is also improving as well at this stage. I would say that, young adults are ideally better at managing stress and navigating complex emotions, but we also know that they're still learning. They may be a little better at that regulatory system that we see. They're not as fly off the handle as we saw in that early adolescent stage. However, when life does throw new challenges to young adults, we do know that those pressures of managing either academics, jobs, the new emerging finances that they may be taking on, they're still trying to figure out how to cope. And this is where parents really do play an important part, is allowing your young adults some decision-making autonomy, but also still being that comfort backdrop, confidant, to give them some support And when they come to you being very available, the I told you so is not helpful. They really do want to do some trial and error learning at this stage, and allowing them to take some risks, safe risks, in terms of how they're managing their decision making, and then being there to coach and guide them in ways that help them regulate and not beat themselves up too bad for making a mistake.
Yeah, so it's kind of going from like the middle adolescence, from being more like a guide for them into being more like a cheerleader for them, right?
Yes.
Being able to allow them the space to perform and play on the field however they're going, and cheering them on through the good times and bad, and make them realize no matter what, you're there to support them.
Yeah, you're the safety net,
yes.
if you will, right?
Yeah.
And we see a lot of adolescents exploring new decision making at this stage. And I know as a parent, sometimes I'm thinking, what are you thinking? That is not going to end well. But interestingly, they do sometimes navigate their own path, and it works out.
Yeah.
So they are likely to be taking on some different problem-solving approaches than maybe you would have encouraged them to take. They're trying on some different thinking patterns, and sometimes it works. Sometimes it works out okay.
Yeah.
So allowing them that freedom of exploring problem-solving approaches is really beneficial.
Right. I imagine I remember as a teenager, like in this stage, like when I was in college, right? I would be living on my own, all independent, and doing my own laundry, and staying up till however late with my friends or studying, come home. But when I would come home, I just want like my mommy to take care of me, right?
You need the break from being an adult.
Yeah, exactly. Can you do my laundry? Can you cook all my meals? And I'm going to take the car, and I'll be back later.
Yes.
Yeah.
Half adult, half not.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. This makes parents nuts.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
When we see in therapy why these conflicts occur, when your young adult goes away, most often to college, and then they come back, they take on the role of an adolescent again for 70% of the time, but then they still want the autonomy of going out late, taking the car, maybe not checking in. Why didn't you come home last night? Yet here your laundry and dishes are still sitting here. So I do think that they're still in that phase of learning how to launch, but still feeling very comfortable knowing that they're still cared for.
Right. Yeah.
And that's something that's a very typical developmental process.
Yeah. And if you have a teenager in this stage that hasn't left the home, right? Maybe it's still they decided to work and isn't able to get their own home or whatever, or maybe they're not even working, they're having a hard time finding a job, and you're trying to support them. I can imagine some tensions can build up of like, look, dude, I signed up till 18 and you're 22.
What are you doing?
Like, what's going on here, I can imagine that'd be a lot of conflict too.
Yes, and I think the thing that we want to keep in mind, remember we said those executive functioning systems are not tending to be fully developed until the age of 26. So there are some limitations perhaps in that full planning and life experience as an adult. Coming from lived experiences, by the time you've had kids, you may have navigated a lot of those life events. How do you manage your bank account effectively? What do you do if you get a speeding ticket?
Oh my gosh.
Right? What do you do if
my first accident? I
was
calling Daddy like, what do I do?
Yeah. It's very rattling. So being there to support them through these firsts, I think is a real important piece, and also to help them develop those executive functioning skills at this higher level as they're needing to execute those more independently is a really important parenting task.
I imagine as a parent too, just being able to have clear conversations with them about new boundaries.
Absolutely.
Right? You have to do your own dishes, you have to buy your own groceries, or whatever you expect of them, but making sure you clearly articulate what you need of them, and then holding them accountable to that as kind of like I'm going to call it a mini adult or a launching adult,
a
right?
little adult, yes.
Yeah.
and having those conversations about where they view their independence, because they may have a very different perspective than their parents. So having those boundaries reestablished is a great idea, Amanda. I think that's very relevant.
Yeah, great. And what about Social development. Like, so what's going on there? We talked a lot about, this is a time where they might really be forming like really serious relationships, for them. And,
yeah, I think the interesting thing that I view in this stage of social development for a young adult is that shift from independent, the thing I view with young adults at this stage is that they're shifting from dependence on family to what we were referring to as interdependence. They're still dependent to some degree, but they're wanting to try out that level of autonomy fully. They're not really there yet. They're still connected to family while they're establishing that autonomy. And that balancing act, it can be very tricky, especially as both sides are still adjusting to those new dynamics.
Yeah. And then also if they're really exploring like romantic relationships and, becoming more deeply intimate with them and possibly thinking about a longer future together, they really have to identify components of emotional safety.
Absolutely.
Such as trust and loyalty and support. My mom used to say that don't ever marry anyone until you've gone through a really big fight with them so you know what they do, right? Do they run away? Do they get physical? Do they sit there and argue with you? And how do you come through, resolve that? Because that's very normal for long-term relationships.
Yeah, and I also, when I do therapy with young adults who have navigated intimate relationships, I really try to encourage them to think about you're learning who you are in a relationship and what you're looking for in a partner in these early relationships. So there's some trial and error here. Their best model is probably their parents.
Right, yeah, so they're probably looking back at their parents' relationships.
Absolutely, whether that be positive or negative.
Right.
And then that's their best sense of a model. And if they didn't have a good model in their parenting relationships, then their friends' relationships, and unfortunately what they see on TV.
Right.
So who are their mentors when it comes to intimacy, and then learning from those dynamics and creating their own sense of self when it comes to intimate partnerships is something that's really being navigated during this stage. And that can be a very stressful, unpredictable process.
Yeah. And then they're also exploring like broader social roles, right? Like what are they as a part of a contributing member of the community or with the workplace and the society at large. And there's so many societal issues going on right now, and they may be very passionate about that and how they want to make an impact and make a change and to make the world a better place, ideally.
Absolutely. And that can also lead to a lot of anxiety when there's that hopelessness or helplessness about what can I do. So we talk about focusing on things that are in your control and also being mindful of if you're really passionate about this, what is something you can do as an advocate or a volunteer in an area to be part of that community that's bigger than you.
Yeah. So in summary, late adolescence is really a time of launching into adulthood. Emotionally, they're young adults, they're building a stronger sense of self, redefining their values, and learning to manage stress. And socially, they're navigating independence, forging deep relationships, and exploring their broader role in society. It's really a period of growth, excitement, and yes, sometimes some tension, but it's all part of taking flight and really going off into the world, right?
Which is the launching phase,
that
right?
launching phase, yes, absolutely. I remember a commercial growing up where there was an eagle that pushed its little baby bird off a cliff to see if it would fly, right? And so that's kind of like what I picture here is just kind of like, you got to learn how to fly someday, and you got to take that jump. And so that's kind of really what we're trying to do there.
Yes. But we're not kicking the kids out right away. Yeah.
Not right away. No, not
got to give them a little
society,
give them a little rope. Safety net.
Yeah.
Yes, safety net.
Well, this has been really fun so far.
Yes. Yeah.
That brings us to the end of our exploration of late adolescence, an incredible period filled with growth, self-reflection, and preparation for adult life. If you're interested in the earlier phases of development, feel free to check out our earlier segments on early and middle adolescence. And stay tuned for the next episode in our series where we unpack neurodivergence and how it shapes behavior and emotional regulation. Thanks for joining us for this segment of Inside the Teen Mind.
If today's episode resonated and you're looking for professional support, Connick & Associates specializes in therapy and comprehensive assessments for teens and families with a strong focus on neurodivergence, adolescent development, and parenting support.
And if your teen who's 5th grade through 12th grade is looking for a place to feel accepted, connected with other peers, and build confidence outside of a traditional setting, the Alive Center offers teen-led, teen-driven programming that supports social connection, leadership, and belonging.
You can learn more about both Connick & Associates and Alive Center through the links in our show notes.
And if this episode was helpful, we'd love for you to subscribe, leave a review, share it, and join us for the next conversation.